I'm now going to talk about Impressionist and post-Impressionist women artists. And these are women working in the late 19th and into the early 20th centuries. There's a number of women who were associated with Impressionism, but the two women who were Impressionists are Berthe Morisot and Mary Cassatt. And they are two of the most famous women artists in history. Mary Cassatt was often mentioned in classes and textbooks, and Berthe Morisot as well, even before women artists became a topic that you would put in your class. Both of these women were the only women who exhibited with the Impressionists at the Impressionist exhibits. Berthe Morisot, who is French, and as you can see, her dates are 1841 to 1895. She was one of the original Impressionists. By that I mean she is one of the artists who exhibited in the very first Impressionist exhibit of 1874. And I found one website that said that only she and Pissarro exhibited in every Impressionist exhibit. But what I found also said that she exhibited in every Impressionist exhibit except the year when her daughter was born, which of course was a life factor that the male artists never had to deal with. Mary Cassatt was not one of the original Impressionists. She was an American. She came over to Paris to study in Paris, and she was actually taking lessons from some very academic artists when she saw Degas' work. Both of these women were exhibiting in the Salon, and the Salon was the official government-sponsored art exhibition, which almost every year, sometimes there was, for example, the Prussian invasion of France during the Franco-Prussian War. They didn't have an exhibit during that year. But most years, unless there was a political uprising or a war or something like that, the Salon would sponsor a juried show. And if you wanted to be considered a professional artist in France, you pretty much had to be juried into this show. If you were not juried into it, you were not considered to be a good artist or a professional great artist. And this was something that the more avant-garde artists sometimes had a lot of trouble with, as some of you already know. Manet was not able to get into the 1863 Salon, and he had to exhibit it in the Salon des Refusés. Berthe Morisot was able to get into the Salon. So the point there is that Cassatt was able to get into the Salon. And they both had favorable comments in the press. So they were reviewed favorably. So basically they didn't have to become Impressionists. It wasn't like, oh gee, I can't get accepted, I'll have to go in with these guys, these radical people. They both chose to become Impressionists, to exhibit with this radical movement. Now, a lot of times today, people look at Impressionist art and say, oh, it's so beautiful, it's so pretty. That is not how the Impressionists wanted you to look at it. And indeed, it was considered to be the most avant-garde, progressive, radical art movement of its day. And it was regarded with suspicion by much of the established artists of the time. Berthe Morisot had friends who were more traditional artists. She had friends who were the Impressionists, and basically some of her friends said, "Oh, don't exhibit with these people." She made her choices. And after they started exhibiting with the Impressionists, they chose to stop sending work to the Salon. So basically they're saying, we're going to paint the way we want to paint. and we are going to paint in a way that is not necessarily the way the establishment, we would use that phrase today perhaps, but wanted to paint. In fact, they are known as the first revolutionary women artists. They're the first women artists to challenge the artistic establishment. And that's one of the things that's very interesting about this. If you think about the other women that we've talked about, a lot of them have very traditional styles. Particularly in the 19th century, we have all of those women artists, particularly the sculptors, who are carving or creating their works in a more neoclassical style. Or they choose a very realistic style. They're not going with some of the more modern movements. Well, for the American women artists, they probably didn't even know much about them. Mary Cassatt is very unusual that way because she is an American artist who is in the forefront of these new, more modern works of art. In fact, you could probably call Mary Cassatt the first modern American artist. It's a thought. Certainly the first modern American woman artist, with all the ideas of challenging the establishment and painting in a new way that term modern can be associated with. So we have these two women artists who are doing something that is essentially new in the history of art. Now, it is interesting that women were accepted into the Impressionists, and they had some restrictions, but they also had some things that made Impressionism viable for a woman artist. The subjects of Impressionism were not nude figures, although some of the Impressionists do paint nude figures, but I think particularly Renoir, of course. But they weren't nude figures in the heroic, classical tradition. They painted scenes of modern life. What maybe ordinary people would be doing. And then, of course, as we all know, the Impressionists went out and painted in plein air, in the open air, out of doors. They painted landscapes from nature. Now, the women who were associated with Impressionism were not free to go out and paint, I should phrase that differently, women who were middle and upper class, and that would include Berthe Morisot and Mary Cassatt, respectable women. They were not free to go out and go to the cafes where the avant-garde artists would sit around and talk about art. In fact, Mary Cassatt could not go to the planning meetings for the Impressionist exhibit because they would be held in a cafe. So in some ways they are restricted. They're not going to go to Montmartre and start painting street scenes. They wouldn't be allowed out to do that. They would have to have chaperones, and you couldn't just sit on the street if you were a woman and start painting. I don't know of any Mary Cassatt landscapes. Berthe Morisot does paint some landscapes. They are landscapes that are close to her home, where she and her sister could walk out, down the block. It's very, good subdivision. Well, they didn't have the word subdivision. A very good suburban area, and they also took vacations. So she could paint on her vacations. It's acceptable. She's surrounded by her family. But she can't go out by herself and go out in the woods, or as I said, you couldn't go to Montmartre, you couldn't go to various places in Paris or the countryside and just paint whatever she wanted to paint. What the women artists chose to do, it was a restriction, but they made it their strength, was they painted things of women's modern life. Domestic scenes, things around the house, or places that women were allowed to go out to, like the opera. And so we do see, now their lives were quite different, I should mention. birth Morisot, as we'll see, she was raised in a family that was very amenable to art, although not the idea that a woman of her social class should become a professional painter. But she did marry, and she did have a daughter. So her family does include part of the subjects for her paintings. One of the things that Morisot did was she set up a room in her house where she could paint. So she could be painting, and if guests came and she had to do the family duties, then she could easily or more easily put it aside and do that. She did have servants and domestic help. Mary Cassatt was a single woman. She chose never to marry because she wanted to devote herself entirely to art. And even today, it's only just recently been where the idea that a woman would have a career doesn't arouse surprise and animosity. Generally, my generation was the first one where women were saying, okay, we should be able to have a career and possibly also a domestic life.